Well, hello, everyone. Welcome to Why Christianity. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. We got a little bit of a late start, but that's all right. We have an incredible guest for you this morning, Dr. Jay Smith. I'm excited to have him with me, and I'm going to go ahead and bring him on now. And welcome, Dr. Jay Smith. Thank you so much for taking the time to be on my channel today, and looking forward to listening to you and learning a little bit this morning. How are
Listen,
you?
it's good to be here. Thanks for having me on. This is my first time that I've been on your channel. But listen, Olin, we work together. We've been on the same platform together in different conferences. So this is nice that I can finally come on your platform here.
Yeah, I was telling somebody the other day that God does still perform miracles. I found myself on stage with Jay Smith and Anthony Rogers and Hatun and honestly, sitting up there, I'm like, how in the world did I end up here? But what an honor to be a part of that, and certainly love working with Muslims and sharing the gospel with them, and just appreciate your work.
Yeah, that was in September where we were together, and in California, you're referring to.
Yes, and then
And
we were.
also, I think also in July, right, when we were in Detroit.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's what I was thinking of was
Okay.
Detroit, Dearborn. Yeah, but we were.
Fascinating because totally different personalities, different types of ministry. What
Yeah,
you're doing is different than no one does what Hatun does, and no one is capable of doing what Hatun does. She's so unique. And then
yeah,
Anthony Rogers, what a mind he has got, and his
yeah,
ability to just take scripture, unpack it, and then show exactly why it's important, and also to be able to walk through scripture and find the Trinity all the way through the Old Testament, find and look and see how we can really pinpoint the antecedents to the divinity of Jesus Christ, and also show that all of Scripture fits together.
yeah,
It's so good to have someone of his mind, his ability, and his background. And then, of course, you there on board with us, who's actually using it in the on the trenches and working with Muslims. It's great to have a whole panoply of different styles and different ministries and different gifting that we had both there in Dearborn, and then also you and I were together earlier than that in North Carolina, weren't we?
that's right. Yes.
With Anthony. Hatun wasn't there, but with Anthony. And then when we were in California together, we also had David Wood. And so, again, another great mind, ability to really say things very pithily, and
Yeah,
able to bring humor and cynicism and satire into his oratory. To on top of which he has a great grasp of how to engage with Muslims philosophically and also theologically.
yeah. I used to think you guys had just some kind of a elaborate note system set up, and you were, looking at those notes. And then I watched you live, and I think you're a lot like Anthony Rogers. You present different material, but you're speaking from your heart, and you have all this stuff in your head. And what a great gift that God's given you.
Alan. The reason why that is, and that has to do with Speaker's Corner.
Yeah,
For 25 years, every Sunday I was down at Speaker's Corner. When you're at Speaker's Corner, you don't have any computer in front of you. You have no books. You can't carry books with you. You have no notes. It came to a point where we did have iPhones, but you couldn't see them because it was so bright. We couldn't see it, so we never used it. So if you're going to get up on that ladder in front of hundreds, maybe thousands of people, and they're going to be throwing questions at you, and you have to answer those questions, you better have everything in your head. And here's what's terrible: they do have iPhones, they do have
yeah,
smartphones, and they're recording you. And if you get one date wrong, or if you get one person's name wrong, or one incident incorrect, or if you quote somebody and you misquote it, you know that evening it's going to be all over the internet, and you're
right.
going to be lambasted. The next week you come down there, they're going to show the quotes, they're going to laugh at you, yell Allahu Akbar. So we had to, as a team, all of us, Beth Grove, she's now Beth Peltola, uh,
Mm.
Hatun Tash was on my team. She was one. We kind of I trained her up to do the work, though she would not get on the ladder after I left. She only gets on when I'm there. But all of us, especially when you're on a ladder, you have to make sure that you have everything in your head, because
Yeah,
you're on stage. It's theater. It's great theater. And the part of theater is you have to memorize your lines. In our case, We have to memorize our material. But see, that helps me now. You notice I don't have any books in front of me. I don't have any notes. I'm just looking at you. Now, there's
Yeah.
nothing I'm going to look at. Whatever question you're going to throw at me, I have to be able to recall it and be able to answer it and be able to source what I'm saying from that recalling. Otherwise, I'm going to be held accountable. So it's a great training ground. A place like Speaker's Corner, it's unique in the world. That's why Hatun's so able to do that. I don't know how David Wood keeps all his figures and facts in his head because he doesn't have that background, nor does Anthony Rogers. I just think
Right.
they have great minds, better minds than I do.
Absolutely. Well, listen, before we, get into it, some of the material that you're going to present, I want to ask you, we talked beforehand. Um, do you have any kind of update at all on Hatun? Um, can you tell us anything about what's going on with her?
Well, we do know she's safe. We do know she's alive, and we do know now pretty much that she is. I'm guessing she's under police protection. There's no way of doing that. She hasn't said so. I'm just saying it. This is my guess.
Right.
And the reason why is because of this Edward Little, this fellow who came with a gun. He was on his way to buy a gun. He had 5,000 pounds. That's about $8,000 in his knapsack. Here's a guy off the street who'd just become a Muslim, a convert to Islam. Where did he get 5,000 pounds from? Where did he get $8,000? Obviously, someone was sending him. In fact, he didn't even know who she was. In his backpack, when he got stopped by the police after getting off the train there in London, he had a picture of Hatun, so he knew so he could recognize her, and he had a map of Speaker's Corner. So he was on his way to Speaker's Corner on a Sunday to shoot her with the gun. He even had the address of the guys that he was going to buy the gun from, and those guys have been arrested. There's 3 of them have been arrested. Now he gets caught, and he is now incarcerated. Well, I think it was December 15th. December 15th was his court case. Knowing that his court case was coming up and knowing that this is going to be there are other people who sent him to do what he was going to do, who paid for that gun or gave him the 5,000 pounds and would like to finish the task. And also, what greater way than to show that he is successful by killing Hatun? That's
Right.
why they took her away and they put her under not house arrest, but under what's the word they use? Where victim housing. There's a name for it. I can't remember what it is.
Yeah. Something
Like
protection.
it's where they're protecting the victim. They know and they give them probably a different identity. I don't know.
Yeah.
And you don't even when that happens, you don't even tell your spouse. In many cases, if it's that dangerous. In this case, she was not able to tell any of her team, which is really unusual. She disappears all the time. She goes on overseas trips. Sometimes she goes into places that are dangerous. I can't tell you where they are or what they are or what exactly how she does it. She goes under the radar all the time. And when she goes, she always tells her team, her DCCI team. This time she didn't. Nothing was told. Nothing.
Yeah.
She missed the meeting that she was supposed to have been at on that Saturday, on the 26th of December, I think it was. And so that's why people knew something was wrong when she didn't show up. And so from that time on, it was before 26th of December. I can't remember the date off the top of my head because it's not that important. But here's what's interesting. We didn't know at all if she was alive. 3 different emails came out where she says, "Don't worry about me, I'm safe." But they were just general emails from the DCCI email, which anybody can hack. It wouldn't be too hard to hack that email. So nobody really knew if this was really her. There's no way of to David Wood, also to another friend on her team, and one to a person here in the United States. So finally, back in January, right at the beginning of January, right after Christmas, I then sent her email on her DCCI, which is the general one. And I said, "Hatun, you need to tell me something specific." At a conference we were at. 3 things. Actually, I just asked her to tell me one thing that only she and I knew, that only I would know that that's from her. No one else would be privy to this, not even my wife. And she wrote back me an email then, about 3 days later. Says, "Jay, please tell people to stop writing into the police. I am safe. I am okay." And then she told me not one, but 3 things that were specific to that incident that only she and I knew about, that only I would know about to prove it was her and no one else. And then I could see this was not done under duress, because she even then introduced some other new material that I hadn't even thought about. And she brought that into the equation. So that's why we know that it was her. And then David Wood got a phone call about 2 days after that saying that and so talking to her, and she said much the same message: stop this. I don't need your help. I am fine. I am safe. I will let you know what's going on when the time comes.
Well, that's very encouraging. Glad to to hear that. We will continue to pray for her. We've had our church praying for her, my Sunday school class, and they're constantly asking me if I've heard any news. But we know that she's in the Lord's hands, and I just have the utmost respect for her and what she does. But
here's one other thing. On any given week, Hatun is discipling 600 new believers in Christ, MBBs. That's what she told me back in September, on any given week. Now, to do that, she has to use YouTube. Sorry, she has to use the internet, not YouTube. She has to use Zoom. Usually she uses Zoom, or what we're using here, StreamYard. But she's always discipling them on her computer, and they're in other countries all over the world. These are people from the Lord. Interesting, not one of them has said anything about her disappearance. Have you noticed that? Wow. So what does that tell you? I know what it tells me. She is still using the internet, and she is still discipling those people, and she is still in contact with them. That's what I'm guessing, because we haven't heard a word from any of them that there's a problem here, proving that she is still accessible. She does have access to the internet, that means, but she chooses not to get on to her DCCI account, or her other one, the one that's both of them are DCCI. So she has her plans, and looks like she's going to wait until she's ready, and she has to be the one that tells us what's going on and what's happening.
Yeah, I shared in one live stream. I remember when I flew into California, there was a gentleman there that picked me up, and we were waiting on Hatun, and I did know what she looked like, and this is, of course, the first time I'd ever seen her. But we looked for, we waited for about 3 hours, just constantly looking, and here she come. And she was absolutely loaded down with bags and, different things. And she's a very strong-willed woman. She wouldn't let us carry anything for her, get the car door for her. I mean, she's very respectful about it, but she's very independent and strong-willed, and I guess she has to be doing what she's doing. But
and did she tell you why she was 3 hours late?
No, honestly, I was a zombie. I flew from Charlotte, North Carolina to Chicago to Texas, and then on to LA, and then sat there and waited on her for about 3 hours. So it was.
She is never late. Why do you think she was 3 hours late?
It's a good question. The airlines probably.
No, the airplane. You saw when the airplane landed, right?
I did, yes, but I wasn't sure what.
3 hours after the airplane landed, she was in interrogation. She didn't even tell you that, did she?
No, I never even thought of it.
Only she gets interrogated for 3 hours. They interrogated, I think it was for 2.5 hours, actually, then half an hour for her to get her luggage and everything else together, because it had already gone through, and it was being put in, I think it was being locked up. When people don't pick up their luggage, they lock it up. And so she had to get that out of security. That shows you what she has to live. She has to live a different life than you and me. I don't get interrogated for 2 hours, 2.5 hours when I go to Britain. She did coming here. And that's the problem she has to live with because she's so notorious.
Yeah.
I'm surprised you didn't ask her why she's so late.
Well, you don't, we sat down in the car, and I, before I met her, I thought I was a pretty good apologist, but she started firing questions at me from the get-go, and I didn't have a chance to ask her, a whole lot of anything. But
she was sussing you out.
Yeah, it was an honor to meet her and to meet you as well. But we were also talking, before we got started here, about the material that you present, this historical argument that you're pretty well known for. And we were talking about how easy it is for people to understand. And I have, spent the last 12 years of my life, studying and, working on various degrees. And one of the problems that I see is that a lot of well-known apologists, their material is above a lot of people's heads. They just can't grasp a lot of it, and I think that's a problem that we need to think very carefully about. We, at least as pastors and church leaders and even evangelists and apologists, our job is to equip the people to do the work of the service, to go out and to interact with these Muslims. And I just appreciate this historical material that you're going to present for us today. And again, I'm just grateful that it's actually useful for a lot of people. You were sharing about the last time I think you spoke at Calvary Chapel, Chino Hills. Was that right?
Yeah.
And you tell us about that and what you told
me.
Let
me just back up and tell you why I'm even doing this. And
okay.
It has to do back in the 1900s. That seems like a long time ago, doesn't it? Yeah. Way back in the when I was I was in London. I had just come to London in 1992. So we're talking about in the last century. 1992, we had just come there. I was going to Speaker's Corner. I was told that's the best place to learn your apologetics, which is true, as I said earlier. And then in 1994, I was taking a course under a professor called Dr. Gerald Hatun, who was at that time the world authority on what I call the origins argument. It's called the origins. What was the origin of anything? The origins of Christianity, the origins of Buddhism, and of the origins of Islam. This is a whole new area that no one really has touched, at least in depth. And he was introducing he had a course called the Origins of Islam. I took it out of curiosity. I thought I knew everything about how Islam began. I didn't think I was going to hear anything new. I had already had a master's degree in Islamic studies from Fuller Seminary under Dr. Dudley Woodbury. And I thought, goodness sakes, what's more can he teach me? All you do is you read the Sirah of Muhammad, the Sirah, which would be the biography of Muhammad. And that's written by Alfred Guillaume, translated by Alfred Guillaume, from Ibn Ishaq. Ibn Ishaq lays it all out, exactly Muhammad's story and how Islam began with him. Now, of course, Muslims will come back and say, no, Islam has always been. But the Islam that we see today, the Islam of Mecca and Medina, the Islam of the Qur'an, that Islam I'm talking about, that Islam began with Muhammad. And so I thought I knew everything. So I go into class there, right, Olin, and there are, maybe 50 students in the class. And this Dr. Hatun, he starts introducing and he starts saying, we don't have any reference to this guy named Muhammad at all in the 7th century. And I say, wait a minute, hold on a minute. Ibn Ishaq. I put my hands up. What about Ibn Ishaq? He was right there. And Hatun says, do you know when he died? Well, no, somewhere in the 7th century. No, he died in 765. That's the mid-8th century. You think he was there 130 years earlier? Did he live for 130 years, are you saying? I mean, he just kind of threw it right back in my lap. He wasn't being foolish. He didn't try to make a fool out of me. I had never heard the dates. Nobody had told me these dates. And see, the Muslims you're going to read or you talk to, none of the Muslims know these dates of these people. Oh, they know the name Ibn Ishaq and Ibn Hisham and Al-Bukhari and Sahih Muslim and Ibn Dawud and Tirmidhi. These are all the dates that they grew up with. I'm sorry, the names that they grew up. These are household names. What you don't know is that these guys died at a certain time, like we all die. But nobody ever bothered to look and see when they lived or where they lived. He said, listen, this is 130 years later that you're reading this story. But he says, do you think that story's from him? I said, well, yeah, it is. He said, did you read the introduction by Alfred Guillaume? Alfred Guillaume spells out very quickly that this is not from Ibn Ishaq. It's attributed to Ibn Ishaq, but it's actually written by a guy named Ibn Hisham in 833. He dies in 833. So he's writing maybe the last 20 years of his life. So say 10 to 810 to 833. That's 200 years after Muhammad died. Ooh, So the earliest we hear anything, and I'm sitting there listening to this, and I'm scratching my head, and I said, well, then what about the hadith? At least, the hadith. Al-Bukhari, he was there. He says, no, he died in 870. That's the late 9th century. That's 240 years after Muhammad died. He died. And he would have been writing the last 20 years of his life.
Right.
Or at least what is written down would have been written within his lifetime. So let's say 870. And I said, yikes. Well, as he's saying this, and he says Abu Dawud or Ibn Tirmidhi, they come after Al-Bukhari. I said, well, then what about the tafsir and the tarikh, the history? The history, there certainly the history is from people that knew him. History, Al-Tabari you're talking about? Yes, Al-Tabari. Al-Tabari died in 923. That's the 10th century. That's even later. That's 300 years. And I'm sitting there scratching my head, but I'm not the only one listening to this. All the other students around me were listening to this. About half the class were Muslim students, about 20, 25 of them. And they were hearing this. And they had all been told, since they were knee-high to a grasshopper, that these guys, these are household names for them. They've heard of Ibn Ishaq and Ibn Hisham and Al-Bukhari and Sahih Muslim and Ibn Dawud, and certainly Al-Tabari and Baidawi and Zamakhshari and Suyuti and all these guys. Every one of them were from the 9th, 10th. Suyuti is from the 16th century. None of them were from the 7th century. Not one knew Muhammad. Now, he didn't have to say it like I've just said it.
Right.
He said, you know what that means? None of these guys knew Muhammad. Actually, I don't recall now whether he said that or I said that, because I kept on raising my hand. I was the oldest person there because these are all young students in their teens and 20s, and I was there in my 40s. And I kept on raising my head. I said, wait a minute. So you're telling me that none of these guys actually lived at the time of Muhammad? They never knew Muhammad? They never heard Muhammad? They never saw what he did or heard what he said? Like we have with Jesus Christ? Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Well, Matthew and John, they were there in the 1st century. They were with Jesus for the last 3 years. They saw what he did. They saw the miracles he did. They heard what he said. They wrote down what he said and did. Mark and Luke got it from those who did hear what Jesus said and did. I said, we don't have anything like that for Islam? He says, there's nothing like that for Islam. He said, I spent 20 years as a scholar trying to find anything wrong with the Bible. And I'm a historian, he said. And what I do is I look and I try to see whether the historical facts fit the evidence on the ground. That's what I do. That's what a historian should do. And for 20 years, I've been doing this against Christianity. After 20 years, I gave up. However, he said, the skills that I use against the Bible are the same skills I would use against the Quran. Because you have like with like. You're in the same part of the world. You're with the same kind of people. And you're using the same languages. I already had the languages down. I knew Arabic. I knew Akkadian. I knew Syriac. I knew Hebrew and Greek. These are the languages that we're all taught to do as scholars of the Middle East. We have to learn these. Mm-hmm. So I said, I already have the skills. I already have, and also I knew about redacted criticism and source criticism. He says, I knew everything about textual criticism and all these different criticisms against the Bible. I just took those same criticisms and I went over this direction. And he says, for the last 20 years, I've been applying them against the Quran. We couldn't find anything wrong with the Bible that hadn't already been found. It all had been done over and everything had been answered. Now suddenly we're finding all kinds of stuff against the Quran. The very same things we've asked of the Bible, the Quran cannot answer. The very same things we've asked of Jesus Christ, Islam cannot answer about Muhammad. The very same thing we asked about Jerusalem, they can't answer about Mecca. I said, Mecca? What do you mean Mecca? Oh, you didn't know about Mecca? I said, no, what are you talking about? There is no reference to Mecca. I said, there's no reference. Yeah, Dr. Patricia Corona found that. I said, who's Dr. Patricia Corona? Now, it was like, and as I'm having this discussion with, now it did happen all in one day. It happened over about a period of 2 weeks because everything he kept on coming up with, like he said, did you know the Dome of the Rock has no Qibla? I said, wait a minute. The largest structure of its day, the most resplendent building, it's beautiful there, has that golden dome. I said, no. Hold on a minute. That golden dome is not original. I said, it isn't? I said, wasn't that built by Abdul Malik in 691? He says, yeah, but it didn't look like that. I said, what do you mean? He said, look at your history. That's been destroyed and rebuilt 11 times.
Mm.
The only original part, he said, is the inner ambulatories. Those two ambulatories, they're inside. He said, but even that doesn't have a Qibla. I said, how can it not have a Qibla? It's the third most holy shrine in Islam. It's where all the Muslims believe why they want Jerusalem back, because that's where all the Muslims believe. Muhammad went in the middle of the night, called the Miraj, and he went up on the back of the winged horse called the Burak, and he flies up from Mecca up to Jerusalem, and he ascends the seven heavens. I said, that story's got to be there. He says, okay, see if you can find it. Look at the inner ambulatory, the only original part. Look at the inscriptions there and see if you can find it. So as I'm having this kind of debate with him, it was fun. And you could see he was enjoying it, but the other students weren't. Suddenly, I noticed that one of after another of these Muslim students started getting up, walking to the door, and slamming the door. Ooh, I don't know what that thing's doing up there right there. My computer loves it. My computer listens to me all the time, and it puts up a one. You'll see some balloons go up after a little while. And so here they start slamming the door and yelling at Dr. Hatun, saying things that were not very pleasant as they left. They were leaving the class. Why? Because they had never heard this material before. It wasn't just me that had not heard it. They had never heard it. And they knew how damaging this was. And they could not sit under that. They couldn't come up. They were quiet. Some of them, once at the very beginning, someone said, "Sir, you've got your dates wrong." And he says, "No, these are not my dates. These are your dates. Go up on Wikipedia, go up on Britannica Encyclopedia, and look at the dates for these guys. Ibn Hisham, Al-Waqidi, Sahih Muslim. Look and see what their dates are." He says, they're all there. It's just that you haven't been taught this, because you're not taught this in your Islamic schools. So as I was watching this, I said, wow, this is amazing. I've got to take this down. I've got to try it out. Now, remember, from 1992, I was up down at Speaker's Corner every day. I was not up on a ladder. I was always on the ground. I didn't know how to do a ladder. Olin, are we taught to do this in seminary or Bible school, how to get up on a ladder and preach? No. We're taught to do 20-minute sermons, and people listen to us, right? Yeah. They listen to us, they talk, and they may applaud us, but at least they don't heckle us, and they don't get up and walk away because of what we're saying. But we
don't even do a Q&A.
Yep. Homiletics. You're taught how to take an idea, source it in Scripture, apply it using 3 different applications, and then you let them go back to their dinner. And you better keep it to 20 minutes, otherwise you're going to have a lot of people sleeping on you. So we're not taught how to get up on a ladder and take on and engage in a volatile situation, a very hostile situation where they're going to yell at you and maybe throw some few punches if they don't like what you're saying. That is what Speaker's Corner was like in the 1990s. It's not like that today anymore. Not since 9/11. Since 9/11, everything changed. And the narrative became, we are people of peace. It's a religion of peace. But before that, it was not. So back then, in 1993, 94, I was going down, and I heard this stuff in 1994. I decided to take it down to Speaker's Corner. On the ground, wow, goodness sakes, I got punched. I had my glasses broken. These Muslims didn't know how to answer it. And so they used fists to answer me. And I realized this is amazing. But unbeknownst to me, someone was filming me. Well, there are lots of cameras, and back then you didn't have smartphones. You had these big lumping cameras you put on your shoulder back in the 1990s, and there was no internet. And so these were these big VHS cameras. Remember the VHS? You got gray hair. You know what I'm talking about. Anybody that doesn't have gray hair won't know what we're talking about. These big boxes where you with 2 spools inside, the tape that go across. Well, they were filming me, and they were selling this film in some of the bookstores, these Muslim bookstores there in London. And one of the students in our class found this. It was on the front, as he went in, it was being displayed in the window, and he went and bought it, and he gave it to Dr. Gerald Hatun with me using his material at Speaker's Corner. And he called me into his office. He was angry, and he gave me about a 10-minute diatribe against what I was doing. He really, really wailed into me. And he said, "Don't you ever do this again. How dare you take what I'm teaching you and use it at Speaker's Corner? The last place on earth you should be using it." And I said, hold on. Wait a minute, Dr. Hatun. you're teaching this material. I'm your student. Once you teach it to me, it no longer belongs to you. Once you give me a lecture, I am free to do with it whatever I want. I can even plagiarize you, though I would be caught out for plagiarism, but I'm not plagiarizing you. I'm saying who you are. He said, "You're giving my name?" I said, "Yes." "Don't you ever give my..." "Well, then what? Who am I name am I supposed to give?" He said, "Do you realize how dangerous this is?" I said, "Yes, this is exciting. Of course it's dangerous. It's exactly what we need." And he says, "You may get me killed." I said, hold on. Stop and think what you're saying. You're not down at Speaker's Corner introducing this. I am.
Yeah.
I'm the one that's going to get killed, not you. I'm the one that's getting punched in the face, not you. If anything, I'm putting my life on the line for you. And I'm field testing your material in the most volatile environment, the best environment to hear peer review. You want peer review? I'm getting you peer review within seconds. You have to wait 6 months. If you write a book on this material, you have to write 6 months to a year before you get a first article that reviews what you're saying. And most of those will be benign because they're done by other academics, because only academics listen to you. I'm taking it down to the street where it belongs. I'm taking it out to where people need to hear this. I'm going to the place where you're going to get the most reaction, the best reaction. And it is volatile. I agree, it is volatile. But I'm doing you a favor, because I'm field testing and see what are the material that works, what doesn't work. And I'm coming back every week, and I'm telling you, this doesn't work. Here's a question I ask: how do you answer this? Have you noticed? That's why I'm asking, put up my hand all the time. But see, the gears started going in his mind, and he was saying, hold on a minute. I'm losing all my students. And I get paid depending on how many students I have in a class. I could see his dilemma. More than that, these students are starting to go to the higher ups, and they're saying, this man is lying. You need to stop. This is all trash. This is Islamophobia.
Yeah.
That's when Islamophobia started being introduced. It wasn't that early, actually. It came later on. But they said, this is hate speech, is what they were saying. And he was getting calls from his supervisor saying, you need to tone this down. Well, what he knew that it wasn't he that needed to tone it down. It was me that needed to tone it down. I was his problem, because I was the one that was raising my hand and telling him to come to conclusions. And he did not want to come to the, it came to the point where anytime he said something new and I raised my hand, he said, I'm not going to answer that. You can come to your own conclusions. He would not come to conclusions because he saw what was happening. Within 2 weeks, every Muslim except for 2 had left. Only Muslims stayed for the whole year. All the other Muslims had left, and he left. He lost half his class because of this material, and also because of me. I'm sure I had something to do with it, because I kept on putting my hand up there saying, you've got to come to conclusion. Help me with this. This doesn't make sense. I've never heard this before, and neither had anybody else. This was also new. So that was 1995. And that's when I got beat up really bad at Speaker's Corner, so bad that I was unconscious. A black man put himself over top of me and took the blows for me. And when the police finally pulled me out, they said, don't you ever do that again. You need to get on a ladder. And from that point on, from 1995, I had to be on a ladder, and for my safety,
right,
my own safety.
Well, just thinking of Speaker's Corner and thinking about how things, go down over there, so to speak. And what are some things maybe that you saw over there that would be helpful to us here in the United States? Because I'm constantly telling people in our churches that you're not going to have a problem talking with Muslims here in the United States. If you're talking to them face to face, if they're your coworker or whatever, Muslims love to talk about God. They love to talk about Jesus, and we don't have to deal with a lot of these things that you're sharing about that are taking place here there in the UK. Is there anything that you see or anything that you perhaps learned while you were there that would be very helpful for us here in the United States?
Yeah, and I think there's lots of different things you can do. I've been working now in Islam for 40 years, over 40 years now. I started in 1983. We're into 2024. So 41 years we've been working in Islam, my wife and I. And what I noticed, Olin, is that the only paradigm I had was to confront Muhammad's character. That's all that anybody ever did. was to confront the Quran, the internal part, the problem with the violence, the problem with the misogyny, the problem with the crudity, and all the problem of irrelevancy of the Quran, and the irrelevancy of Muhammad, and how what he did with women, what he did with childhood, what he did with families, what he did with anybody that he stood against him. Those are the things that we've been confronting, which makes sense to us because we've been comparing him with Jesus Christ. And when you compare him with Jesus Christ, Jesus comes out on top. But here's the problem. What we didn't realize is every time you're comparing Muhammad with Jesus, Jesus certainly comes on top. But what about the Muslims who are listening? They're seeing this as hate speech.
Yeah.
They're seeing this as Islamophobia. That's why they're yelling Islamophobia all the time. And they walk away from you. Why would they want to listen to you if you're sitting there besmirching their prophet, the man who they have so much reverence for? And I realized I wasn't really making much headway. Oh, we were getting a few converts, one here, maybe one over here. You could number the number of converts we were getting from this material. Not that many, not at all. What we were getting is a lot more anger, more and more anger. Because if someone were to come up to you, Olin, and say, look how irrelevant Jesus is. He didn't marry. He had no children. He never knew anything about families. He knew nothing about the most foundational blueprint for living. Why should we follow him? More than that, he never stood up to anybody. He was a wimp. He let people kill him. All he could do is run away, and not even his disciples could defend him. Why would that be a model for today? He never led anybody. He never led any government. He never knew anything about politics. He never was involved in these areas. Why is he a model for today? I mean, these are perfectly valid points. What would you do as a Christian? You'd probably want to just walk away from that because you're besmirching. And there's hard things to find about Jesus that really hurt you. You know what I'm saying? That really, But Muhammad, there's lots of things you can find that really start to cause you. It's like a prick in your side. It's like a thorn in your flesh, and you don't want to deal with it. So what do? You don't understand Arabic. Therefore, you don't understand what you're reading. Or you have no idea what you're talking about because you're not going to the right sources. Or you're looking only at one area of his life and you're not looking at the other area. I mean, this is something that David Wood and I had in our debate. In our debate 3 years ago, when he said, we have to use these traditions. We have to use them. And he says, why would anybody write such terrible things about this man if he was such a model for them? And I said, no, they're not terrible to them. They're terrible to you because you're comparing him with Jesus. But every Muslim that reads that does not come to the same conclusion you come to. As Christians, he is terrible. But as a Muslim, the fact that he was strong, the fact that he did destroy his enemies, the fact that he was able to rule, and look what he left behind, and look how he controlled a whole continent, a whole peninsula, and look and see what he did to women. He kept them in their place and made sure that they were real women. And look what he did to his enemies. He destroyed his enemies. That's hugely attractive to a lot of Muslims. Hoorah! I want a man like that. I want to be like that. That's why we're seeing so many Muslims like that. That's hugely attractive. Even the things that David brought up. Well, what about the fact that he was seduced by Satan? I said, yes, but look what happened afterwards. Every prophet is seduced by Satan, but you didn't finish the story. What about the fact that he wanted to commit suicide, but he didn't, did he?
Yeah.
We all go through that. There are many times when men of God want to commit suicide, but he didn't. He worked through it and he came out stronger the other end. What about the time that he was frothing at the mouth and he was induced by demons? I said, you don't even realize exactly for a Muslim, that shows you that you're inspired. That's what a kahin, every kahin gets froths at the mouth and has all these manifestations. That shows you that you are actually talking from God. We don't like that because we're seeing what the Bible says about that. But see, you're looking at Muhammad through Christian eyes, and Muslims don't. They don't know the Bible. They don't see that part of Muhammad. Though everything you're bringing up, they say, what's your problem? Hoorah. Why wasn't Jesus like that? In fact, why do I want to follow a wimp who never, ever stood up to anybody except the money changers in the temple? And even then, he only whipped the animals. He didn't even whip the people. Yeah. Why do I want to follow? So you can see, we're arguing against talk. We don't realize our audience, and we think our audience is us when they're not. They don't know Jesus like we know Jesus, and they don't really care. In fact, they're also saying, "Jay, you're making our point for us. Muhammad's a much greater man to follow, not Jesus. That wimp, never married. Didn't last very long, and then let people kill him so ignobly on the cross, and he couldn't even defend himself from the cross. Not much of a prophet there. So you can see why I realized, goodness sake, this stuff, really, we're talking right past the Muslims that we're arguing with. And then I realized when I saw this class, and I was in this class with Dr. Hatun, just how powerful this material is. Because you're not talking about his character. You're not talking about Muhammad's character. You're not talking about his misogyny. You're not talking about all these, what I call bad breath material. You're not bringing bad breath into the discussion. And remember, when you have bad breath, no one wants to talk to you, right?
That's right.
They want to walk away. In the same way, they come to us and say, you're just bad breath. Who cares about you? Why should we listen to you? You don't even understand what you're talking about. And you're not very convincing. Plus, you're not fun to be around because just look at the stuff you're doing. You're looking at these. You're not looking at really what he did. And then you want to introduce me to this guy who there's nothing attractive about him, on the fact that he healed people. Can you see why? It's not resonating? So what we're saying is, who cares whether or not he was misogynist? Who cares whether or not he killed everybody that stood in his way? He didn't even exist. He wasn't even there. Now suddenly, how are you going to defend that? Now suddenly they got to pay attention.
Yeah.
Now said, ooh, that is a problem. If he didn't even exist, if there is no place called Mecca. See, if you start with Mecca, Olin, everything else falls flat, because you have to have Muhammad living in Mecca. That Muhammad, because there are many Muhammads. We have reference after reference to Muhammad in the 7th century. Every one of them, look and see where they lived. They lived in Damascus. Were in Gaza. They're way over in Ctesiphon, what is today Baghdad.
Tell us about that name. Tell us what that means.
Muhammad is just a title. It's not a name.
Right.
It became a name in the 8th century, and it was created as a name for the Muhammad of the South. The Southern Muhammad is the name itself. But before that, it was nothing more than a title. And more than that, it was also a title for Jesus Christ, because it means the praised one, or it's the praised one, or it is the anointed one. Even the lovely one, it's there in Song of Solomon, chapter 5, verse 16. It's in the Old Testament. The lovely one, that altogether lovely, Muhammad, M-H-M-D. It's the same word in Hebrew as it is in Arabic. And we've been trying to say, when people are saying, see, this is Muhammad. Yes, they are correct. It is Muhammad, but it's not the Muhammad. It's not the Muhammad. It's the lovely one, altogether lovely. That's referring to Solomon. Solomon was referred to as Muhammad. You can trace this name all the way back to to 1400 BC. It has been used by the Phoenicians. It's been used by the Hebrews. It's been used by the Christians. The Syriac Christians in the 6th century used this title to refer to Jesus Christ. That's why on the Dome of the Rock, when it's introduced by Abdul Malik, who's an anti-Trinitarian Christian, he's still a Christian. He says, say not three, for God is one. He has no son. It's attacking Jesus' divinity, attacking the Trinity, attacking his sonship. And then it says, La ilaha illallah Muhammadur Rasulullah. There's only one God but God. And the praised one, who's it referring to then? This
Good
Jesus
question.
that you've just been talking about. The one who's not triune, who's not divine, he's not the Son of God. Neither does he beget nor is he begotten. That's right before it. So it's all referring to this praised one is nothing more than a messenger. He's not these things. He's this. He's a messenger and only a messenger. That's an Arian argument. That's what Arian was arguing in the 4th century.
Right.
Abdul Malik is, so why are we surprised? It's the same thing that the Jehovah's Witnesses are arguing today. It's been around since the 4th century, probably even before that. So certainly, it's no surprise it's there on the Dome of the Rock, and it's there as the Shahada even today. But it was the praised one when it was first introduced. How do we know that? Look at the coin by Muawiyah. Muawiyah in 661. He keeps this coin up until 679. So for almost 20 years, he has a coin of himself, a copper coin, and he's there as Muawiyah, and he has a cross above his head, and he's holding a cross. So what does that say to you? He's a Muslim?
Muslims have a problem.
Not anybody who's wearing a cross and holding a cross has to be a Christian, right? Because that's the symbol of Christianity. On the back side of the coin is the letter M. Above the letter M is another cross, a third cross. And what's right below the M? Muhammad, M-H-M-D in Arabic. This is the same Muhammad that is in Hebrew. Muhammad that we see in Song of Solomon 5:16. Exact same letters.
Yeah.
Why are we so surprised? We, Christians who know Hebrew, should know exactly what that is. So who is this referring to? The praised one, the lovely one, the anointed one. And who is the praised one? Who is the anointed one? Jesus. That's why we are holding a cross. It's Jesus who is the anointed one. Why then are we surprised it's on the Dome of the Rock, or it's on the coins that he coins in 696? Sorry, 691. Abdul Malik coins in 691, and then really does it in 696. Look at the coin in six. I have it here. It's actually, I've just moved so we don't have it unpacked. I have that coin in 696, and on it, it's all these references against Jesus, his divinity, the Trinity. It's all about say not one for say not three, for God is one. He is no son. He is not begetteth, nor is he begotten. For the praised one, and then right after that, the praised one is nothing more than the prophet. And you associators, see, there's the associating mushrikun, mushrik. You associators, what is the associator? Who is that referring? That's us.
Yeah.
Why? Because we are saying that this Jesus is God. We are the associate. We will defeat you, associated. And it's right there on that coin. Everything is on that coin. It's an attack against Jesus. It's an attack against his Trinity. It's an attack against his divinity. And it's an attack against us for equating him with God and for being mushriks. And that's why you've got to read the script. Just read what the evidence tells you. The coins don't lie. And that's why the Muhammad of the 7th century, many times, not always, because other people, we have Umar, who is from Iraq, who comes over and destroys and takes over Jerusalem in 638. He refers to himself as the Muhammad, the praised one. Because people who go to battle, they then call themselves the praised one. It's a title they use to aggrandize himself. So other people were called praised ones. That's true. But look and see. I mean, someone like Thomas the Presbyter, who talks about this Muhammad. He talks about it in 636. He writes about him. But he writes about him and he uses the Persian spelling, Muhammad with a T, which means that this Muhammad is a Persian Muhammad. He is a Lakhmid. Where are the Lakhmids? Just look on a map and see where they lived. They lived in what is today Iraq, in what is today Mosul and Tikrit. So that Muhammad was way up there. So there's another reference. It's not Jesus this time. It's actually a praised one. It is the king of the Lakhmids. It is the ruler of the Lakhmids. So in many cases, it is used. It is quite a normal title. But by the Christians, it was used to refer to Jesus Christ. Now, so when did it become a man? That happens in the 8th century. And we can see this by following the inscriptions. And specifically, we can see it by looking at John of Damascus. John of Damascus writes the of the heresies. What's it called? The
Heresy of the Ishmaelites?
Heresy of the Ishmaelites. Thank you. The Heresy of the Ishmaelites in 730. Look at the date, 730. This is well into the 8th century. Who is John of Damascus? He is absolutely important for this whole discussion because he's living right there in Damascus.
Yeah.
He's living in the caliphal courts. He was there working under Abdul Malik. He was there working under al-Malik. He was there when this was all being introduced. He was privy to this happening. And that's why he, in 730, this praised one who is referring to Jesus on the Dome of the Rock, by 730, within 40 years, it's now coalescing into a man named Muhammad. Mm-hmm. Now it's becoming a person named Muhammad. Why? Because these Arabs who now are Ishmaelites, remember they're Ishmaelites, they're not Muslims yet. Isn't that interesting? He doesn't call them Muslims. And we're in 730. There's no reference to Muslims. They are Ishmaelites. They are still in the line of Abraham, like the Jews and the Christians. But whereas the Jews and the Christians come through the line of Isaac, they come to the line of Ishmael. So they're Ishmaelites, they're Arabs, they don't have a revelation like the Jews and the Christians have. They don't have a prophetic line like the Jews and the Christians have. You need a prophetic line. You need to have a revelation. That's why Abdul Malik starts the revelations. That's why all the earliest manuscripts all come after 705, after he dies. And his son Walid is the one that really introduces these manuscripts. Look at the manuscripts we have today. I have 3 of them right over here. And they're all from 705, 720, 760, 780, and 800. They're from the 8th and 9th century. None of them are from the 7th century, proving that this was all done in the 8th century. And that's why John of Damascus, but see, John of Damascus is so revealing. Read the Heresy of the Ishmaelites. And what has he said? This Muhammad, who has these weird beliefs in 4 books. Notice he mentions 4 books. The Quran is 1 book, isn't it? Actually, no,
Yeah.
116 books.
Right.
Sorry, 114
14.
books. It's 114 books. But notice he names the books. The book of the cow, that's Surah 2 today. The book of the women, that's Surah 4 today. The book of the table, that's Surah 5 today. And the book of the camel, that's Surah nothing. There is no camel book.
That's right. Yeah.
And the Quran is not made up of 4 books. It's made up of 114 of them. Why in the world are there only 4 in 730? Ooh,
Camel ate it.
Well, you got the wrong one. It was actually a goat that ate it.
That's right. Yeah.
Can you see the problem here? Can you see? Just look at the evidence, and you can see that even by the 8th century, the Quran had still not been put together. But now this Muhammad is now being attributed as the author. And what does he say? That this Muhammad got it from a monk, a Christian monk. What Christian monk? Bahira is the name of the Christian monk. That is well known. So it looks like the Bahira of the 8th century, who is introducing this to this Muhammad of the 8th century, he only had 4 books, 3 of which are now incorporated into the Quran, and they're 3 of the largest books in the Quran, proving that even by the early 8th century, the Quran had still not been finalized. This is exciting stuff. So you can start to see the evolution of not only the name Muhammad, but also the evolution of the book. You need to have a prophet in the prophetic line from Ishmael, and you need to have a book, because every prophet has a book. That's why Muhammad had to be chosen. That's why the book had to be made. But what do you do when you need a book? You have to write it quickly, right? How do you do that? Well, you don't have material at hand. So therefore, you go and start borrowing from all different sources. That's why the Quran's all over the place.
Yeah.
It's ulta, pulta, pulta. No, one Quran, one book does not follow the other. There's only one complete story in the entire Quran, and that's in chapter 12. You can see it's all over the place. It is confusing to read. It has Old Testament characters who do things that none of the Old Testament characters did. I don't recall Abraham going into Mecca. I don't recall Abraham even being anywhere near Mecca. Not that far south. That's 1,000 miles too far south, in a city that didn't even exist. Going into the Kaaba and taking a big idol and destroying all the smaller idols in chapter 21, verse 51 of the Quran, it says so, and then be thrown into a fiery pit. No, not Abraham. He was not in a fiery pit. That's Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. They got the wrong guy doing the wrong thing at the wrong time, because you're borrowing. And when you borrow, you have to start putting stuff together as you can. And that's why you don't sit there and look through and try to make sure that it makes sense. That's why the Quran is so full of misconceptions, so full of contradiction, and does not flow whatsoever. It's what you would do whenever you create a new book. You just borrow right, left, and center, and hopefully nobody will notice that you got the wrong story. And the reason they've got the wrong story is because everything they borrowed were apocryphal. These were sectarian writings, because those are the only thing that were written in Arabic that they could use. So you have all of these apocryphal accounts, like the one of in chapter 5, verse 31 and 32 of Abel being killed by Cain and Abel, and the raven showing Cain how to bury his brother. That's not in the Bible, but that comes from the Targum of Jonathan ben Uzziah, written in the 2nd century. It's an apocryphal account. The story that I just told you about of Abraham going and destroying all the idols, that comes from the Mishnah of Rabbah, written in the 2nd century, almost word for word, the exact same story. The story of Solomon and Sheba and the hoopoe bird, that's a great story in chapter 27, verse 17 to 44, but that comes from the 2nd Targum of Esther. So these are all apocryphal accounts. They have been written in the vernacular. They have been written, and they were not really written. They were orally transmitted in Arabic. And so they grabbed these stories and they put it into Arabic. But see, then you got to say, what Arabic are you talking about? Because the Arabic was not a language at that time that had any dots or vowels. It only had 16 consonantal consonants. It had 16 letters, and that's why they didn't know what they were reading. And so by the time in the 8th and 9th century, they had to start adding 5 dots and 3 vowels. Once you add the dots and vowels, everybody could put the dots and vowels where they wanted to. And by putting the dots and vowels where they wanted to, they came up with, by the 10th century, 700 different Qurans, according to Dr. Nasser out of Harvard University, Shadi Nasser. By that time, you can see there was a dilemma, and that's why Ibn Mujahid in the 10th century was given authority to then choose 7 of the 700. He chose the 7 that we have today, and he called them qira'ats. And every Muslim believes that those qira'at writers, every one of them was there listening to what Muhammad said. Look at their dates. They begin in 836, go all the way up to 905. I'm sorry, 736 go up to 805. So 8th and 9th century. That is 100 to 200 years after Muhammad. None of them knew Muhammad, and they did live where Muhammad lived. And so that's why you can see the qira'ats start to proliferate. And that's why al-Shatibi in the 12th century, 1194, had to choose another 14. And then al-Jazari, in the 15th century, in 1429, had to choose another 9. So 7 plus 21 plus 14 means 21 plus another 9 gives 30. By the 15th century, there were 30 of these, whittled down from 700. That was still caused a huge dilemma. By 1924, they had to whittle it down to 1, and that's the Hafs that we're using today. So you can say all of this, you just look at it, you can just follow the evidence on the ground, and it shows this is as man-made a religion as you can find.
Let's go back to those manuscripts for just a moment, if you don't mind. You know, I have somewhere here, I have a copy of the John Ryland fragment, which is a 2nd century credit card size fragment of John 18. What's the earliest Quranic manuscript that they have? You mentioned some of those, and I know it depends on who you ask, but what's the
this is a contentious, and I'm not going to take a stand on this, but I would suggest that the Birmingham folios are probably the earliest. Okay. However, be careful, because now what Dr. François de Roche is saying, that actually those 2 folios, it's just 2 pages front and back, actually belong in the Petropolitanus manuscript. It belongs to the one he has there in the British Library. I'm sorry, in the Bibliothèque Nationale, because they're missing. They are the same script that you'll find in the one that he has there in Paris. So it could be that. If that's the case, then they are 8th century. Nonetheless, the carbon dating dates them from 568 to 645. 568, that's 2 years before Muhammad was born, if he lived. 645, that's about 9 years. It's about 645. So we're talking about 13 years after he died, if he lived. Now, if that's the case, it covers his lifespan. So Muslims are going all over the place. Ooh, this is proof. We now have Quranic material that's from his time. Without looking and asking, have you read those 2 folios? They're made up of 3 different surahs in your Quran, chapter 18, chapter 19, and chapter 20. There are 330 verses in those 3 chapters. These are only 33 verses. So it's only 1/10 of those 3 folios, and they're not all together. Notice, they're spread over 3 different surahs. So it's obvious these predate the Quran. What's more, they are in Arabic. That's true. They don't have any dots and vowels. That's true. So they are manuscript. They are consonantal texts. But notice what they are. They're nothing to do with Islam. The chapter 18 version material is all about the 7 sleepers of Ephesus. That's a story that was around since the 6th century. Well known. And it's still there today. You can go and see it. You can even, I've been there. I've been to where the cave is, supposedly. They're real close to Ephesus. My sister lives in Turkey, and so we went to visit it. And it's been around since the 5th century, So that story is nothing new. The next one in chapter 19, that's the story of Jacobs of Sarug. That's been around since the 2nd century, and it's nothing to do with Islam. It's a Christian sectarian writing. It's an apocryphal Christian writing. It's never considered to be authoritative, but it's not Islamic, okay? And then the third one in chapter 20 is all about Moses, the story of Moses lifted straight out of the Old Testament. So there's nothing about Islam in any of these 3 stories. Of course, they would have been there in the 7th century or in the 6th century. In fact, they were there in the 2nd century. So these would have been around in Arabic, not pointed, not dotted, and not voweled. That's why if you're going to create a book in the 8th century, you've got to pull from these very 7 sources. And they pulled a little from they pulled the story of Ephesus. They took this folio and split it up into 3 different surahs. Why didn't they just put it the way it was when it was written in the 7th century? If those dates are correct, I'm willing to get those dates. But if they are correct, then those would be the earliest. Now, the other ones have been dated to 705 and later, and that would be the Sana manuscript would be the earliest of all the manuscripts. That's 705. So that's early 8th century. That would make sense because that would have been the one that was written at about the time of the Walid. But it is only 93 verses. So it's only 23% of the Quran. It's a very small part of the Quran.
Right.
And parts of it are written at a later date. So it's an amalgamation later on. But the earliest part. Now, what's interesting is that it is a palimpsest. So it has an underscript below it. And when you separate those two, the underscript is made up of 63 verses. But when you compare those 63 verses with the same verses above it, there are 70 manuscript variants. They disagree with each other in 70 places, proving that the lower script, which is probably late 7th century, that would be the earliest Quranic manuscript we have, that did not agree with the upper script, which does not agree with the manuscript we have today.
Right.
So you can see there's problem after problem after problem. It looks like these dates fit perfectly with what our good friend Dr. Stephen Shoemaker is coming up in his book, Creating the Quran. If you read that book, he suggests that the Quran started to be put together, not in its complete form, but started to be put together during the time of Abdul Malik and Al-Hajjaj, which is around the beginning of the 8th century. Let's say 700 to 705 is when it was starting to be put together. These manuscripts support that.
I was just trying to think too. They didn't have access to an Arabic Bible until much later on, too, right?
Until the 9th century, because the Bible was not translated. The earliest manuscripts we have for the Arabic New Testament is the Sinaiticus, Codex Sinaiticus 121, or it may be 151. I can't remember if it's 151 or 121. That one is from, I want to get this right, 868. So that's late 9th century.
Yeah.
And that's in Arabic, and that's the first. So if they didn't have the New Testament, you can see then why they had to borrow all these other extra biblical, extra revelatory material that were many of them were just being written down in consonantal form.
Excellent. Well, just one more question, and I want to be respectful of your time here today. We're kind of getting close to the end. Just thinking too about you mentioned the coins, and it seems like every time a shovel goes into the ground in Israel, they're digging up something to support the Bible, and they've really never found anything that is problematic for us as Christians. But is there anything outside of the coins as far as archaeology that you could share with us that tell us a little bit about Islam?
Yeah, well, actually, this is the beauty. I mean, what you're bringing up is one of the most difficult things for Muslims to respond to. And that is, if you have a city, let's just start with Mecca, okay? If you have a city which is called Mecca, where Adam and Eve were thrown down to, well, actually, Eve was thrown down to Mecca. Adam was thrown down to Sri Lanka. He was 90 feet tall, so he went boom, 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 and just walked his way up to Mecca to join his wife. Nonetheless, that would be the earliest city in history. Am I correct? There's no one earlier than Adam and Eve. Yeah. In order to have a city, in order to have a settlement, you have to have people. So if they're the first people, that's the earliest settlement. So it's the oldest establishment for humankind in history. Now, we don't know the date for that. I'm not going to put a date on that, but let's just say it's tens of thousands of years old, okay? Obviously, it was also where Abraham lived, according to chapter 21 in the Quran. He's there in the Kaaba. He's rebuilding the Kaaba with Ishmael, and he goes and destroys all the idols in the Kaaba. So in 1900 BC, he should have been there. So in 1900 BC, there should have been a Mecca. By 1900 BC, there should be well known, because if Abraham knew it, everybody knew it, right? Hagar and Ishmael are running. Hagar's running back and forth there in the same story, looking for water for her son, and that's where Safa and Marwa are, just 100 yards from the Kaaba. So certainly by 1900 BC, Mecca is well known. And then we're told that it was a center of trade, north, south, east, and west. It controlled all the trade, according to the trade route theory, which means everybody anywhere should have known about this place. It's probably one of the greatest cities in the history of mankind. Well, then why can't we find one reference to it anywhere? Remember, according to the Islamic traditions, up to 300 prophets were buried in Mecca, all around the Kaaba. And you're buried the same day you die. And they buried them in a kneeling position so they could pray while they were dead. Now, if that was the case, they should still be there today. Their bones should still be there today. Look at all the construction that's going around. There are cranes after cranes building all these 50 to 60-story buildings, these skyscrapers all around the Kaaba. The fourth highest skyscraper in the world is now there, that clock tower. If you're building skyscrapers, you've got to dig into the ground. When you dig in the ground, you come across artifacts, and certainly you would come across these bodies. They haven't found one bone anywhere. There are no bones anywhere. More than that, they don't find anything.
Wow.
Gibson asked this at a conference he was at for archaeologists in Dubai, and he asked them, "Where, what have you found?" And they said, the earliest thing we have been able to find is ruins of an Ottoman fort. The Ottomans come to power in 1299 A.D. So this is after 1299 that they have the earliest artifacts that they can find. Proof that it is obvious that there is nothing there for them to find for Mecca. If Mecca is not there, like I said at the very beginning, then you can't have Muhammad there. Now, there's no way we can find Muhammad. I'd love to be able to take off. We can't. I'd love to go to Medina and take off that lid of his burial and see if there's bones inside there.
Right.
Probably are, but I'd love to be able to do DNA testing on that bone and see how old they are. And I would suggest that they are probably no more than 700 to 800 years old. And they had nothing to do with a man named Muhammad who lived in the 7th century, 1400 years ago. So these are the things that Muslims won't let us do. But we can look at other things. We can look at the coins. There are no coins that from that far south. There's nothing. There are no mints that far south. All the coins are up in the north. Then we can look at the inscriptions, and the inscriptions are also devastating because all the inscriptions, these are rock inscriptions. They don't disintegrate, they don't deteriorate, and they're all up in the north. They're all up down in the south. Nowhere in between. Not in the 7th century. It's not to the 8th and 9th century that we start seeing rock inscriptions from the middle part. It was called Petra Deserta for a reason. I'm sorry, Petra Desert. Let me get their names right. I better get this right. Arabia. We have Arabia Petraea, which is in the north, Arabia Deserta, and Arabia Felix. Those are the three Arabias that the Romans refer to. And they called Arabia Petraea in the north because of Petra. Petra was the capital of that. Yeah. But that all included Jordan, Syria, and Iraq. Arabia Deserta was that whole middle area, which is all desert. And that's why there was no one there. And then Arabia Felix was in the south, what we call Yemen and Oman today. And there was a lot of people down there. Because why? Because there was water in the south, there's water in the north, and there's nothing in between. If you don't have water, you're not going to have food, no people, no towns, no cities, no civilization, no history. It's as simple as that. So when you ask me, what do they have? Well, just go and ask. Patricia Crone asked us when she was living, and she read and wrote 15 languages. She went back to all the documents from the 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, all the way up into the 8th century. She went way up to the north. She went to the Assyrian documents, and she read them in Syriac, and she couldn't find any reference to Mecca. She went to the Roman documents, no reference to Mecca. She went to the Persian documents, nothing to Mecca. She went to the Nabatean documents, which are up in the north, which are about 600 miles away, no reference to Mecca. She went to the south. She went to the Hadramaut area, to the Himyar, no reference to Mecca. She went to every one of the civilizations surrounding Arabia, couldn't find any reference to Mecca at all. Even across the Red Sea, she went to the Nubians, look at all the Abyssinian documents. She could read all the documents, couldn't find a reference to Mecca at all until 741. 741, that's the 8th century. That's the mid-8th century. That's 100 years after Muhammad was dead. And that Mecca is referred to in southern Turkey. It's not the Mecca of today. So you can see coming and going in every piece of evidence, you cannot find Mecca. Now, this is the statement I always make. The more you scratch, the more you find. The more you find, the more we shine. The more we shine, the more they whine, oh, how sublime. Why is it that whenever we scratch in the ground, we only find things to support our man in his place, doing his thing at that time? In every case, you cannot find one fault with the biblical material because it's the right men in the right place doing the right things at the right time. That's why biblical archaeology is a growing field of study. Veritas International University has one of the best archaeological material. What I want to say, programs. Thank you. Programs anywhere in the world. Veritas International University, where I teach, is primarily known for its archaeology digs all over the Middle East. Why is it that they haven't found one thing that contradicts the biblical text. They haven't found one thing, and yet we're finding one thing after another, and that's why so many people are coming on board. We are able to shut down Islam just by using historical artifacts and historical texts and what we call redacted criticism or source criticism or textual criticism. Any of these criticisms that are asking the question you just asked shuts down the Quran, shuts down Mecca. Once you shut down Mecca, you shut down both the Quran and Muhammad.
That's why it's so important for us to learn this material. And, I encounter a lot of Christians that, they're just like, just share the gospel. And I think, again, this is just why it's so important that we know this and we're able to present it to our Muslim friends. And we do this because we love them. The more, just to kind of say what you said a little differently, the more I study and the more I learn, pursue apologetics, the more I'm convinced that Christianity is true. And I couldn't quit if I wanted to. But at the same time, I'm amazed at some of the things that people will believe that contradict Christianity. And, it's so important for us as Christians, as the church, to be able to have these meaningful conversations with our Muslim friends and present this material that you just shared with us, to be able to talk about it. And I just believe God's going to use it. And I'm grateful that he's using you, and appreciate you being with me here today and sharing this information. Any closing thoughts that you might have?
Yeah, and I'll end with this. This is why, in some ways, this is probably our not only our best material, but this material has to be used by Christians. We need to use this more than anybody else. Why? Because every one of these questions that we're throwing at Islam, the redactic, source, form, textual criticism, all these criticisms that we are throwing, these are all neutral. Anybody can use them, and certainly the atheists love them, the humanists love them. I know non-Muslims, they all love this material, and I keep on saying, don't use it. It's not for you. The reason why I don't want them to use it, and I only want us to use it, is that they don't have a response to this. They have no answer. They have no antidote. And because of that, they're just going to make Muslims as nihilists. They're just going to make them humanists. I don't want them to become humanists. Right. I want to bring them home. I want to bring them to Jesus Christ, because we are the only ones who, when we shut down Mecca, we give them Jerusalem. When we shut down the Quran, we give them the Bible. When we shut down Muhammad, we give them Jesus Christ. Amen. When we shut down Allah, we give them Yahweh. We are the only ones that have the antidote. We are the only ones that really have the response, the answer. We are the only ones that have what they already want. And what so many of these Muslims, they're halfway home. They're just like us. They want to know God. They just got the wrong God. They want to have a relationship with God. That you can't get with Allah. They want a scripture that is not only codified, but can be supported and that fits the historical context of what it talks about. Not with the Quran. Only the Bible has it. And they want to know who Jesus Christ is. They've got Issa, they've got the wrong Jesus. We need to bring them home. This is really our material. This is really our time. And this is why I want to get as many people excited as possible. Now, everything that we've been doing, the thing that I did at Calvary Chapel in September, and then I did in a much more unpacked form, a longer form in November, that is now being written up. We're writing it up. We're just putting in our proposal. We've been approached by a publishing house. They want it published by this summer. So that's going to be in written form. All this is going to be in written form, hopefully within a few months, so that people can read it and see the pictures and see the visual material rather than just hearing it on YouTube.
Amen. All right. Well, real quickly, tell us about your YouTube channel and where people can find out more about you. I know probably everyone watching knows all about you and where to find you, but just in case.
Maybe. So I'm on really two channels. One of them is Fander Films, PFANDER FILMS. So it's the German spelling of Fander, named after Dr. Karl Fander, who's my hero. PFANDER from the 1800s. Yeah. I do pretty much what he's doing. I do both polemics and apologetics, like he did polemics and apologetics. So Fander Films is where I primarily have my material. I also have the Jay Show, but that has not been going for about 7 years. We're going to resurrect it this year. So that will be interviews like what we're doing right here. I'll be bringing people to interview them. And then I'm on CIRA International, CIRA International with Al-Fadi. Al-Fadi and I, we work hand in hand together, and we go to a studio here in the United States, and we put out sometimes 30 to 40 episodes at a time in a 2-day period. We do that twice a year. So that's where all the newest material. But I take those same videos and I put them up on my show, and then I embellish them, put more pictures, and get more material on it than what we do in the studio, because that's we're doing one after another. I have much more time to unpack it much more when I'm here in my own studio. So Fander Films, City International, and the J Show.
Excellent. All right, Jay. Well, thank you again so much, brother, for taking the time to be with me today.
Have me come on board anytime you need me. God bless you. And thanks for what you're doing, Olin. It's so good to see you. Then good also to have participated with you in these different conferences and to see your heart. You have such a beautiful heart, and God's going to use you mightily. May this continue. God bless you.
Bless you, Jay. Have a good afternoon, brother. All right, just want to encourage everybody as we close here to go to Jay's channel, like and subscribe to it, share these videos, and certainly would appreciate it if you would do that with mine as well. Thank you so much.